Hello, everyone. We're taking a break from our symposium to join you here live. If you've been in the symposium, you're probably like at saturation level with Marie. So if you're still here, you're a big, huge trooper. If you haven't been able to join us for the symposium, follow along at our, new and next tweets or CTL Conf, CON. Is one of the other ones, so you can see what other people are getting out of the event. But today we're going to talk a little bit about the voice of our resumes and how do we make sure that they're connective and accessible without making them unprofessional, and how do we walk that line. So look forward to that conversation and hearing your thoughts on what do you do in a resume to make it interactive, make it engaging. Probably not interactive, but engaging. And so go ahead and type into the chat where you're joining us from. Let me know that you're joining. Say hello. This was a hot topic in our Facebook group around third-person voice versus first-person voice. And it seemed like there was some confusion about those terms. So I wanted to clear up that confusion and have a conversation about what is going on in terms of voice and pronouns in a resume. And, we're always watching the trends, making sure that we are on top of it and not getting stuck in the way we've always done it just because that's the way it's always been done. And open to your thoughts and your discussion on this topic. Again, drop your name in the chat, say hello, and let me know where you're joining from. And if you're watching a replay, feel free to drop your name and where you're joining from in the chat with the hashtag replay and share your thoughts. This is an ongoing discussion even after this live session is over. So let's talk about third person versus first person right here off the bat. This was a little point of confusion with resume writers. I find it as a point of confusion frequently with our Academy certified resume writing students, and something that people just may not have heard before. And of course, as in everything in the English language, it's not clear cut. Hi, Marcia, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. We're excited to have you here. So let's talk about first versus third person. And the best way to do this is to share this handout that we use in our course that gives you some of the information around third person versus first person. Okay, here we go. So when we're talking about first person versus third person, it's an idea of who we're writing about. If we are writing in first person, it's I cultivate long-term relationships. He or she cultivates long-term relationships. Now, in the body of the resume, it's likely that we're talking about their job. And if it's a present job, we're using this form of the verb, cultivate. So it is first person, even though we aren't using the I. If we slip into third person, he or she, it starts to feel a little funny. It's not good. It does create that weirdness in the resume. This is what I see oftentimes in people's summary sections, because in the summary, we're not sure. Should we do first person? Should we do third person? In the summary, I'd encourage you to still stay with that first person voice. So not manages, but looking at, if we're in the summary, I recommend just using that present tense verb. This is something that your client does. It's who they are. They've done it over and over again. Unless you're talking about a specific item, a specific accomplishment, which would be past tense, it's okay to use the present tense. So manage an operating sales team, that would probably be more in a job description. But if you're talking about something they do over and over again, you can just use the present tense. So a lot of times I'll use something like repeatedly, but then you use the present tense verb, right? Repeatedly manage. Now, one of the challenges that comes up when people get a little confused is if we're going to say in senior leader who, and then you think, oh, am I doing third person or first person? It really doesn't matter because they're the same. If you did, I am a senior leader who manage manage. I am a senior leader who manages, or he or she is a senior leader who manages. Then you get that verb with the S because you've got this lead in. I would encourage us today to minimize these types of phrases. You might have one lead in into your summary paragraph, but using these types of descriptors over and over again starts to feel a little bit hollow because you're talking about who I am instead of showing me who you are. You don't walk around telling people, I'm a X, Y, and Z. You introduce yourself, you maybe say that once, but then you flow into the conversation. And the more titles and descriptors that we use, the harder it is to connect. And this doesn't matter whether you use pronouns or not, right? It really wouldn't matter whether you say, I am a senior leader. That doesn't make this more conversational. It doesn't make it more accessible. And I think that's one of the things that I see people say about pronouns that I don't necessarily think to be true. Just because you use a pronoun does not make this more human. What makes it human is to get to what really differentiates your candidate and tell me stories about that. Then it doesn't really matter whether you use the pronoun or not. Our age-old horrible example, I am a results-oriented person. Because you use I there doesn't make that more of a story. If you tell a good story, you don't need the I. It's a good story. Now, do we want to use pronouns in a resume or not? To me, that's a completely different conversation in terms of how we are telling the stories. And usually when I use a pronoun in the resume, it's in a section where we're talking about, additional information. And it's kind of a Birgitta Moller, one of our ACRWs in Sweden, does this fun section about me. And sometimes she'll use pronouns in there, but she doesn't always use pronouns in there. It's towards the bottom. It's more of that human interest connection. But when we talk about making a connection with our stories in the summary and in the body of the resume, the pronoun doesn't make it more effective. It's the story. Are you telling a good story about what that person did? Do you have context? Do you have results? Do you have differentiating actions and style? Because when you have those elements in a story, you don't need pronouns for it to be an interesting, engaging story to read. Whether you want to use them or not, to me, is more based on your client's audience and what are they expecting. Do your research so that you understand if it's a new, hip, cool company, is that what they're expecting? Maybe. If it's a more traditional company, probably not. In fact, they might see it as unprofessional when you use those pronouns there. So those are just my 2 cents on third person and versus first person. And again, most of the time we are using first person voice. We're assuming that I, not he or she. Assumed first person. Is that the correct way to describe it? Yes. Assumed first person all the way. Watch out for those S's at the end of verbs, and it can be occasionally correct. Senior leader who manages. We want to be thoughtful about how many phrases like that we use in a summary. When I see 3 of them in a row, it just starts to get like, instead of telling me who you are through examples, you're trying to be pushy about who you are with descriptors. Yeah. Is this okay? I don't know. Is this okay? I don't know. What we're trying to figure out is okay. If you want to give me more, happy to answer. Better to use ATS, edible words that convey results oriented. Yeah. And they're looking for verbs and really thinking about how you can convey that. Part of the other problem that we get into in our writing, and especially if we are taking too formal of a voice, and oftentimes when I see writers who are overusing the descriptors or using third person, they're really new and they're trying too hard. Short sentences, start with a verb, get to the point. And really the shorter this, you can get too choppy. Short sentences, a line, line and a half, are your friend. Once you get longer than that, most of the time they get hard to read. Occasionally they'll have, a full 2-line or maybe 2.5-line bullet, but not very often these days because people don't read like that. Shorter sentences start with that active verb, either, present tense if it's something that's happened or something that the person does all the time in their career, kind of that defining action that they take in their career, or past tense if it's an accomplishment. And then we can tell the story. The verb leads us into the story. And then we want that context, comparisons, before and after, a little bit of their style or how they accomplish that. And of course, the result, which is oftentimes that verb that we're leading with is the result. And thinking about how you put that together. The resumes can be very engaging and could occasionally use a pronoun. That pronoun should always be I or my. You really want to be thoughtful about your audience. Again, a traditional US company, and if you're joining us from other places in the globe, I'd love to hear what your neck of the woods would say, but a traditional, larger US company is going to see that as unprofessional or just unnecessary, or maybe that the person isn't a good fit culturally, right? It's that little piece. And I've had clients that tried it. They went and they, showed it to people, and they came back and they said, yep, this person said that this just isn't what they're used to. There's a fun thing about doing something that people aren't used to. Is it going to be seen positively or negatively? We can take a chance. We can talk about that with our clients and figure out if they want to take that chance. Yeah, and we don't have to state everything. People often think they need to say who they are. I prefer that we show who they are by the selection of the stories that we tell. Branding is a selection of the stories that we tell, not telling someone who we are. If I tell you I'm strategic, that doesn't really mean anything. But if I show you through examples of stories, this was going on, I saw that this was going to be an opportunity, and this is what I did. Then you can see that strategic brain at work versus the exclamation of it that doesn't really tell you anything, doesn't have any context, it doesn't have any results, it doesn't even have any differentiation. It's just there as something that I'm a word that we all define differently. Perhaps a lot of times when people use adjectives, I think, well, what would that mean? And how can we say that a little bit differently? So first person, assumed first person without the pronouns is going to be your mainstay for most clients. That does not mean you can't write engaging stories. Write those engaging stories. Include the details that make it interesting. And then you'll have to work at getting it into, the flow so that it's easy to read. And one of the other things that a lot of our students do when they first start is using were, was, being, been, those be verbs, and they get in the way of an active verb. They get in the way of telling the story. And a lot of times they're an indicator that we can go back and write that statement so that it's easier for the person to read and to skim, because we know that most people are skimming today. Any other thoughts about how we get our voice into the resume, our information in, or if there's anybody who really is on the yes, let's use pronouns wagon? I'd love to hear why and what you're seeing, or the types of companies that you're seeing. Because I don't think this is a yes or no, it's a when. When do I use pronouns in the resume, in the summary, in the about me section at the end? And for what companies might I use those pronouns? When is it appropriate? And as we're moving, using them, I don't think is going to totally discount a candidate, but is it necessary? Does it really make the resume any better? Is it worth the risk? That's what I always, when I'm thinking about these new things, is it, and using first person or pronouns isn't new. The Human Voice resume article by Liz Ryan came out over 10 years ago now, maybe right around 10 years ago. So this human voice idea is not new. When is it appropriate? When does it matter? Is it going to be worth the risk? Because we know it could be seen negatively. We know not using it is probably quite a bit less likely to be seen negatively. So we walk that line with our clients, we do the research, and we help them think about the strategy behind why we might use it or not. And there might be some ways that we use it very creatively and fun, especially in a section, a personal interest section at the end of the resume when it's appropriate. Present tense for jobs in the past. I don't use present tense for jobs in the past. I use present tense for the description of a present tense job. So if they're currently in that role in the job description section, I'll use present tense, the things that they're in charge of, their scope, etc. And then I'll use past tense for the accomplishments in that job, which means we have to use some kind of formatting to separate the two so that it's obvious why this is present tense and that is past tense. We've got scope and those types of things here, and then bullet points with the accomplishments or whatever differentiation you want to make between those two. But in a past job, everything's past tense. Occasionally, if I'm doing a challenge, action, result format, that challenge may be present tense because it was the challenge at the time. And that doesn't happen very often, but occasionally those challenges will all be in present tense throughout the entire resume just because of the way it's formatted. Yeah, excellent. Well, thanks for geeking out on first and third person voice. I'll drop the link to this video in that conversation that people were having in Facebook. Third person is not, we don't want to use that. We don't want he, she, we want I. Your client is writing their resume about themselves. You're the ghostwriter, right? And they're the author. They're writing that about themselves, and they're the subject of the resume. And we want to assume that I throughout. Let me know if you have any other questions, and we won't see you next week because next week we have a symposium session that conflicts with the live session, but we'll be back 2 weeks from today. See you then.